I'm Brian Karam, and I've spent decades covering politics. Now I'm taking you behind the scenes, one interview at a time.
Join us as each week Brian confronts the issues that matter, posing the questions you wish you could ask. No filter, no agenda, just the truth.
We're not here for sound bites. We're here for substance. Join me, Brian Karam, every week as we cut through the noise and get straight to it. This is Just Ask the Question, where curiosity will lead us to the facts.
Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform, and remember, when you want answers, all you have to do is just ask the question.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to UnSpun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. Hi, Truth Seekers, and welcome to this week's episode of the UnSpun Journal Club. In these occasional mini episodes, I take an interesting new publication relating to public information, news or social media, advertising, propaganda, and I break down what the study did and what it means for you. So this week, we'll learn about a paper that found a newer technology that can unfortunately make social media a whole lot more annoying. So let's learn more and let's get unspun. Before we get into this week's paper, we need to go all the way back to 2014. It's kind of hard to believe that this was just a little bit over 10 years ago, but it marked a big change in the video game industry. Video games have been a big thing for a long time, but the industry was seeking new players because new players are new markets, and so they tried to make the games a little bit more diverse. Prior to this, I think it's fair to say that video games were mostly marketed to young white middle-class males. But as the gaming industry seemed interested in growing their customers, that came along with some criticism. In 2012, there was a media critic named Sarkeesian who wanted to do a Kickstarter to pay for a series on the sexist tropes in video games. If you don't know what I mean by that, it can be things like the female character Princess Peach needing to be rescued, or it can be things like very revealing costumes on characters if you play them as female, and it can mean some other things too. It's also important to note that as technology got better, creating video games was not just the domain of large game studios. It became more possible for people to create engaging games independently. And one such independent developer was a lady named Zoe Quinn. And here is where a beef turned into a pile-on. In August of 2014, Quinn had a former boyfriend named Aaron Joni who published what's come to be called the Zoe Post. It was a 10,000-word blog post talking about their relationship and saying that Quinn had been unfaithful. The online commentariat, particularly on 4chan, but also on some other forums, kind of latched onto this claim that Quinn had traded sex for a positive review of a game that Quinn had released. And this was not true. Nathan Grayson, the journalist accused of trading the sex for the review with Quinn, never actually even reviewed her game. And kind of interestingly, there was an online discussion area called Internet Relay Chat that started talking about Quinn and her alleged infidelity under a headline of ethics in journalism. This became the beginning of what was known as Gamergate. Several people like Quinn and Sarkeesian and with a developer named Brianna Wu were attacked online, including email campaigns to pressure advertisers. And some of the targets of Gamergate were doxxed, and they got death and rape threats so bad that they actually had to kind of go into hiding. Now, some of this criticism was done through what we could call a sock puppet. This is basically operating a fake account so it looks like you are not who you are, so that you can appear to be a woman or a minority, and therefore people are less likely to criticize your views. Another thing that happened was something called sea lining, and we're going to talk about sea lining in a minute. Gamergate had quite a big impact. A lot of scholars see it as a precursor to the modern alt-right. The tactics that were developed during Gamergate included really aggressive memes and posts and very personal harassment. And in a sense, the modern harassment culture has kind of grown up out of this. These online communities and their tactics are used today by official government accounts in multiple countries, as well as just online trolls who want attention. And the idea of a sort of aggrieved masculinity that Gamergate gave has really changed our modern conversation. Even some of the modern political rhetoric around DEI and wokeness can be traced back to these Gamergate ideas. One of the tactics that was used to harass these women was something called sea lioning. This is a term that first showed up in 2014 in a webcomic by an artist called David Malky called The Terrible Sea Lion. In the comic, the character says bad things about sea lions, and an actual sea lion overhears her. The sea lion follows the character into their home and even into their bedroom, and it seems super polite, but it just increasingly demands that she justify the opinion that she has with evidence. And the internet users thought that it really captured the way that some social media conversations go. During Gamergate, it was used to describe the way that people would behave when they would just kind of swarm their targets, saying they just wanted a civil debate. But really, sea lioning is a kind of trolling. And there's a specific sort of rhetorical strategies that people do when they do this. They pretend to be super sincere. It's sort of a disinterested person who wants to be logical. That's the way they present themselves. But really, they're being mean. Here's some of the things that they do. First, they give relentless, unending requests for evidence, sometimes about things that really are self evident, and sometimes about things that have already been demonstrated. They will also sort of have performative cluelessness, asking the person they're targeting to explain things that really anybody could just look up. And they will irritatingly act like somebody owes them a complete explanation. And the goal of all of this is just to exhaust the person they're targeting. Eventually, the person will get sick of this kind of thing, right? They'll say, I've already explained this. They'll say, everybody already knows what this thing is. And the person who is sea lioning will then start acting like they've actually been harmed. They will take an angry response as proof that the person they're targeting is unreasonable and therefore not worth listening to. You can think of sea lioning as sort of a denial of service attack, but it's targeted at people instead of servers. They keep the target so busy trying to answer their bad faith questions that the target can't do other things. And this has a couple of bad social effects. When people are targeted in this way a lot, they will start assuming that anybody who's asking them a question has a mean agenda. And sometimes it will even just silence the targets. People don't want to deal with this kind of crap, so they are less inclined to share things that they know. They're just getting pushed out of the conversation, and they're so afraid of being swarmed like this. And the research has found that especially women and people from marginalized groups are more likely to censor themselves in the face of this kind of harassment. And so that brings us to this week's paper. This week's paper is about how malicious AI swarms can threaten democracy, and it is by Daniel Schrader and many co-authors. It was published in the journal Science in January of this year. Now, to understand this week's paper, you first have to understand agentic AI. You can take an AI chatbot as sort of like a helpful research assistant, right? You ask a question, it gives an answer. But agentic AI is different. It's more like a smart assistant, and instead of just talking with you, it can actually do things. You can give it a goal, and it can figure out the steps to meet that goal, plan the work, and finish the job on its own. It will even learn from its mistakes and remembers the things that's been done in the past. It's being used in several different and really interesting ways today. For example, in schools, agentic AI could be like a teacher. In hospitals, you can have AI agents that monitor data from something like your smartwatch and automatically call your doctor if there's something dangerous. Or you can have it help with paperwork by doing things like looking through medical records to pull out those pieces of information that you need to get approvals from insurance companies. In banking and money, you can use AI agents to look at purchases that are coming in on credit cards to identify fraud faster. And you can use it to review long legal contracts and pull out things that maybe a lawyer needs to look at. And there are also particular applications in media. For example, AI agents can serve as ad managers. They can do the buying of advertising space, which is really a surprisingly complicated problem because ads are sold in marketplaces based on how many people are trying to publish on a particular topic or keyword, for example. So an AI agent can run the whole campaign, and it can automatically move money around based on which ads are performing the best. Agents can also be video creators. They can take pieces of longer videos and repackage them according to user demand and automatically publish them. There's a really interesting case of this involving Arizona State University, faculty lectures, and mini courses that they're selling to the public. So AI agents have a lot of different uses, but they do also have drawbacks. Because you're getting the AI to essentially prompt itself, it can start going down a path that's caused by a single flawed assumption, and there have been some really bad results. Some businesses have seen this and had like large amounts of data deleted and things like that. But the paper that we're talking about today is about the idea of AI swarms and using agentic AI to influence and cause problems in social media. We have seen for a long time now that there have been bots, right? Those little reusable programs that are triggered by certain user actions. So, for example, you could write an automatic program that would say, whenever someone posts the word vaccine in a post on X or Threads or Blue Sky, that you should respond with something about vaccines being harmful or something like that. For humans in the system, right, the social media users, this was not that bad because these kind of things got pretty easy to spot. You could look for obvious things, like an account that posts many more times than a human could reasonably do in a short time period. AI swarms are groups of programs, agentic AI, that work together as a team. And when they do that, they can actually join online communities and pretend to be real people. And when it seems like it is real people and all of them have the same idea, it can trick you into believing that everyone agrees about a particular topic. Because they're autonomous, which means they run by themselves, they can spread a lot faster than humans ever would. So, this has some implications for information warfare. We've talked about on UnSpun before that it's nothing new that people will lie in order to gain power. But AI has actually kind of changed this game. You know, back in the 2016 election, there were troll farms that used real people to post fake news. But this was somewhat limited because humans need to sleep and humans need to get paid. So it was very expensive and you couldn't do it all the time. But as we have probably all seen with stories about students doing work with AI or lawyers doing work with AI and deepfakes and more, modern AI can do some pretty convincing work that looks like it's made by a human. And this is especially true in that social media context, where most of the people who are consuming the information are moving pretty quickly and they don't usually put in a lot of time for critical thinking. So you can have this system where the AI agents can create very convincing content and they don't tire out. They can argue with people 24/7. It's like a sea lion that never needs to go to sleep. And some studies have even found that people will find fake news more likely to be human than stuff that's written by actual people. So this is pretty concerning. So, how does this all work? The AI swarm in the title of the paper is a group of agents that will work together on a goal and have very little human input. They work kind of like a hive, which is to say that one behavior can spread among all of them super quickly. You can have thousands of fake accounts that all change their story at exactly the same time in order to push a new lie. They kind of work with the algorithm to do that. They communicate better than the old bots did. They'll use generated fake faces that look pretty real, and in their words, they'll do things like use slang so they don't get caught by spam filters. They're able to observe the content that's happening online. So they're taking a community like a Facebook group, for example, and they can figure out exactly what kinds of lies affect people the most. We've talked about this before on Unspun. There's things that kind of stir up your anger or your fear, just emotional things. And they can also, though, test the ideas. They can try out different versions of a lie to see which one gets the most likes and then spread that one. And so, again, this was done in the past with humans running troll farms, but now it can be done constantly, and there's almost no cost in scaling a particular lie. And this is a real problem for democracy. We all know that democracy works best when people can talk honestly and decide for themselves, but AI swarms can rule that. They do that in a couple of ways. One is by faking a crowd. If you see 1,000 people in your feed saying that a particular Supreme Court ruling was bad, you might start to believe it just because you've got that sort of social proof from all of those people. But if those 1,000 people are just one AI swarm, you've been tricked by a fake crowd. And it can be a crowd of 10,000 people or 100,000 people. Again, there's not really much of a cost to scaling, and you don't really have a good way to defend against that. It also allows for harassment at a big scale. You can get a swarm to send thousands of very mean messages to a politician or a journalist or a lady writing about video games or another newsmaker, and it can make them feel so attacked that they will actually quit their jobs. Other researchers have talked about locations where this kind of sea lining is a real problem. One is climate change, where trolling accounts can keep asking actual scientists to prove basic established scientific fact. It also happens in civil rights criticism, where critics will demand that people from marginalized groups provide historic proof of systemic bias. And they'll claim that if someone doesn't take their time to provide satisfactory proof, and they're never satisfied, that in itself is proof that systemic bias didn't exist. The whole "you have to prove this to me" attitude, weaponized at scale by AI, could definitely silence people. And when you have lies everywhere, it also numbs people to the truth. They start believing that because there are a lot of lies, everything must be a lie. And so they lose their trust in institutions. We saw this already with human troll farms back during the pandemic, and it can actually have deadly consequences. A really important one is that a lot of AI models learn by reading information that's publicly easily available to them, which is the internet. And, it kind of blows my mind already that when I get an AI summary from Google Search, for example, and even if I don't ask for it, it gives me one. Oftentimes, the citation it's giving me is something like Reddit or Quora. And, I don't know for a fact that Reddit or Quora users are wrong when they say things, but I don't really have a good reason to believe they're right either. So, as AI models learned by reading the internet, and AI models are filling the internet with lies, those lies are starting to show up more in unexpected places. Truth is literally getting pushed out in those cases. So that is pretty grim, and we do need to think about what we can do about it. The paper does have a few suggestions for that. One of them is that you could create AI agents that look for AI swarms and actually create warnings. You could, for example, have a community notes kind of thing where an agent would go in and fact check false information. You could also come up with some way to prove that something was made by a human and not a bot. And that would require developing a kind of a different technology. What this reminds me of is something that you'll see in science fiction if you're a fan of that. Something science fiction thinks about a lot are undetectable robots or aliens who are hiding in with humans for some reason. And in a bunch of different series, they use blood testing to ensure that something they're interacting with was a person and not an alien or a machine. So you could develop some kind of blood test for human detectable content. Now, these are technical fixes. There could also be legislative fixes. In the United States, that's going to be really difficult because of the freedom of speech laws, but in some other parts of the world, they have had success with online legislation that tries to get an online environment more accurate. You could, for example, regulate social media companies so that they have a financial disincentive to allowing this kind of traffic. You could also possibly try to have an external standard board. Within the article, they talk about something like an AI observatory, where you'd have experts from all over the world warning the public about AI attacks. Kind of like a National Weather Service, but for AI misinformation spread. One thing that the article makes pretty clear is that the next few years are going to be really important. If we don't do something to figure out how to find and let people know about these AI swarms, it's going to be harder and harder to determine what's real and what's computer generated, and it's going to be a lot easier to spread lies. So as citizens, that might be something we should be looking to encourage our government leaders to work on. But for the moment, when things are not regulated, I think your best bet is to look offline or at least look for multiple source verification of the claims that you're seeing, particularly on social media. Alrighty, that is it for this week's Journal Club. Thanks for hanging in there with me, truth seekers, and stay sharp. Thanks for getting UnSpun with me this week. UnSpun is a production of me, Amanda Sturgill, and is a proud member of the MSW Media family of podcasts. Send me your thoughts and ideas about trickery in the news on Gmail at theunspunpodcast@gmail.com. I even write back. And find this episode's show notes and more information at theunspunpodcast.substack.com. Want to learn more and get smarter? Check out my book, Detecting Deception, Tools to Fight Fake News, which is available on Amazon or your favorite online bookseller. And until next time, stay sharp, everyone.
Hi, I'm Frances Callier.
And I'm Angela V. Shelton.
And we're Frangela.
You know what you need in your life? The Final Word podcast.
Yes, you do.
That's right. It is the final word on all things political and pop cultural.
Where we make real news real funny.
Where we inspire you so you can #resist.
Subscribe and get a new episode of the Final Word podcast each week. It's the news we think you need to hear.
That's right. We think you need to hear it. Okay?
Yeah, it's what we say so.
That's right. And because all we do is give, every Thursday you can listen to our hysterical podcast, Idiot of the Week.
We round up the stupid because you know what? Somebody has to.
Okay. All we do is give.